Welcome to Listing History's Top 15 Things You Didn't Know About Virginia City, Nevada. Number 15. You've probably never heard of the actual founders of the Comstock Lode. Credit is given to Henry Comstock, but brothers Ethan Allen Grosh and Hosea Ballou Grosh are said to have discovered the lode in 1857. However, after the injury and death of Hosea, Ethan went to California with ore samples and a map of his claim in order to raise funding for future mining efforts. He died of frostbite while crossing the Sierra Nevada. When Comstock, who had been watching over the brothers' cabin, learned that the last Grosh was dead, he examined the contents of a trunk in the cabin, which contained documents and ore samples, then claimed the cabin and the land as his own. Comstock later bullied his way into being partner of a strike discovered by Peter O'Reilly and Patrick McLaughlin at the head of 6 Mile Canyon, saying they were on his land. Comstock sold his share of the Ophir to Judge James Walsh for $11,000 and his share of another mine for $5,500, well over $500,000 in 2021 currency. He opened stores in both Silver City and Carson City, but as he reportedly didn't have a head for business, he was soon broke. Henry Comstock eventually ended up in Bozeman, Montana, where he was found dead of a self-inflicted gun wound in 1870 at the age of 50. Number 14. The V&T Railroad, called the Queen of the Short Lines, began construction in 1869 and covered 21 miles, descending 1,575 feet into Carson City. It consisted of 7 tunnels and the Crown Point Trestle, which was torn down in 1935 so that the ground under it could be worked using a method called open pit mining. The final passenger train ran on May 31, 1950, and the tracks were dismantled. It has since been rebuilt by railroad enthusiasts and runs daily trains during the peak tourism season of Memorial Day through the end of October. Tourists can also take trains from Carson City during tourism season and during special holiday events. Number 13. John Mackey, one of Virginia City's most successful mine owners, began life in a one-room dirt shack in Ireland, then immigrating to New York City's notorious Five-Point slum. In 1851, at the age of 20, Mackey made his way to California, where he worked in gold mining before ending up in Virginia City as a $4 a day miner in 1859. By saving his money and buying up small claims of his own, he eventually hit the jackpot of $1.6 million in the Kentucky mine, worth over $52 million in 2021. Eventually, his share of the Consolidated Virginia Mining Company, in partnership with 4 other Irishmen, known as the Bonanza Kings, would be $50 billion in today's dollars. The Mackey Mansion in Virginia City originally housed the offices for Gould and Curry Mining Company. After hitting it rich, Mackey and his wife filled it with opulent furniture and decor. Many of these original furnishings remain today. Take a tour and see the Comstock's first indoor bathroom, the mansion's fabulous hanging staircase, and hear tales of spirits who still inhabit this stately home. Number 12. Unlike other boom towns in the West, Virginia City wasn't a particularly violent place. Between 1870 and 1880, when the population was at its all-time high, there were only 14 homicides. Number 11. President Ulysses S. Grant not only visited a mine, but he is also said to have played poker at the famous Washoe Club. After his presidency, Grant returned as a performer at Virginia City's famous Piper's Opera House. Number 10. Between 1860 and 1880, Virginia City boasted the second largest Chinese population in the United States. They first came from California in 1856 to dig a large ditch that would bring water to the Gold Canyon mines from the Carson River. Virginia City's very own Chinatown sprung up along Union Street between G and F Streets, with its residents often finding employment as cooks, laundrymen, and wood sellers. Little today survives of the men and women who lived there. As mining declined in the latter part of the century, most Chinese left to find greener pastures elsewhere. Number 9. Virginia City's miners were the highest paid miners in the world at the time. They earned $4 per day, the highest mining wages of that time. The wage was negotiated by the Miners' Union of the Comstock, and no miner was allowed to work unless he was a dues-paying member. Number 8. Miners were looking for gold, but kept finding a bluish-gray mud that they discarded in frustration. Eventually, this mud was identified as silver, valued at $3,000 a ton. Number 7. The Sutro Tunnel was created to drain the extremely hot geothermal water in the mines. Nearly 4 miles long, between Virginia City and nearby Dayton, the tunnel began construction in October 1869 and was completed in 1878. It was considered a feat of engineering. However, by the time it was completed, most of the ore had been extracted above the level of the tunnel, and better pumping apparatus was available by that time. The man behind the tunnel, Adolph Sutro, quickly sold his shares in the tunnel and moved to San Francisco, eventually becoming mayor and building the Sutro Baths in 1894, which were destroyed by fire in 1966. The Sutro Tunnel is currently being restored. Number 6. The Silver Terrace Cemetery on the northeastern end of town is reputed to be haunted. Established in the 1860s and used by many different religious and civic groups, most of the graves date prior to 1920. Gravestones range from elaborate stone carvings to plain wooden markers. The cemetery is a peaceful place for quiet contemplation. It closes at sunset, although each Halloween, visitors are welcome to visit the cemetery until 10:30 p.m., many hoping they might see a ghost. Restoration of the cemetery is underway, funded by donations and a Save America's Treasures grant from the National Park Service. Number 5. Mining was an extremely dangerous vocation, and in 1869, fire broke out at the Yellow Jacket Mine. Firemen who responded to the emergency were pushed back by the smoke and flames, which caused timbers to collapse and poisonous gases to seep through the shafts and tunnels. Ultimately, the only way to deal with this fire was to seal off affected mine shafts, which remained hot for several years afterward. Approximately 35 miners perished, many whose bodies were never recovered. It was the worst mining disaster in Nevada up to that point in time. Number 4. In addition to fire, a miner's nightmare was deadly cave-ins, a problem solved by an innovation called square-set timbering. The inventor, German immigrant and engineer Philip Diedesheimer, was called in from San Francisco by the Ophir mine. As ore was removed, it was replaced with squares of timbering that created a framework to hold the surrounding ground in place. Examples of square-set timbering can still be seen today at the Collar Mine, where visitors can get a taste of the mining conditions of the 1860s. Number 3. Most Virginia City prostitutes are long forgotten, but the memory of Julia Bulette lives on. Julia was found dead in her home in the red light district on D Street in January of 1867, having been beaten and smothered and robbed. Months later, a Frenchman named Jean Million was charged with her murder after a woman claimed he had sold her a dress that had belonged to Bulette. He confessed to the crime, but later recanted that confession. At his trial in July of that year, items found in his trunk were identified as belonging to Bulette. There were no witnesses called for the defense. He was found guilty, and in April of 1868, Million was hanged in front of 3,000 onlookers. Julia Bulette is not buried in the Silver Terrace cemeteries, but on a hillside east of town. Number 2. Probably the most famous inhabitant of Virginia City was none other than Mark Twain. Born Samuel Clemens in Hannibal, Missouri, Twain made his way to Virginia City to join his brother Orion in the early 1860s. Failing to make his fortune as a miner, Twain took a job with the Territorial Enterprise newspaper. His writings were often picked up by other newspapers in Nevada and California. His humorous tale, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, brought him national and international fame. Twain left Virginia City in May 1864 after a feud with a rival newspaperman threatened to culminate in a duel. His years in the West, including his time in Virginia City, were recounted in his 1872 book, Roughing It. And number 1, more than $700 million in gold and silver was taken out of the Comstock Lode between 1859 and 1919. Eventually, the mines played out, but Virginia City lives on as an exciting tourist destination, having been designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1961. Thanks for joining us at Listing History. If you like this video, please be sure to hit like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video.